Hey, everybody, Melissa Mackenzie, the American Spectator publisher, here on The Spectacle with Scott McKay, editor at the American Spectator, editor at Reviver, editor at, the Hayride. It just keeps going.
You're
The
right.
man, the myth, the legend.
I have way too many projects going on right now, and I need to cut them back. And the only way I can do it is finish them, and they never get finished. So
Yeah,
that's
well,
life in the big city, I guess.
that's what happens when you're important. You start having to have people, Scott. So you might need to have people
I
to help you
probably
with
did
your
need people.
schedule. All right, so today was supposed to be a monumental day where norms were chucked and Donald Trump was indicted or arrested or whatever for the crime of paying off a hooker, essentially. And this has been litigated and dumped a couple times. And really, I think that Stormy should be sued for extortion, but that's another thing entirely. I have some theories about why this all happened the way it did. And I personally am skeptical about whether or not they're actually going to do this with him. So last week was a very bad week for Joe Biden. All the payments came out, the China stuff came out. Ukraine is not going well. The bank failures keep piling up. And so it's an economic kind of disaster story, a world stage disaster story, a banking disaster story, and then the Biden personal family, everyone in the family essentially is on the take. And so doing the bidding, it looks like, of their masters in Ukraine and China. I don't know.
No question about it.
And so this was a terrible week. And so I felt like, in order to sow discord and to muddy the waters, this is classic Obama, by the way. Obama's administration did this to perfection. Just throw some shite into the air, let it hit the fan, splatter everywhere, and people are so disgusted getting this stuff off themselves that they're not paying attention to, what's going around them. And all the bad things that are about to happen. And I think that's why we heard this Trump thing. And then Trump, being Trump, shrieks to the media, which that this isn't coming. Everybody has this umbrage, which they knew would happen. And all of that is to set the stage for, well, you said that it would defy norms to indict a president, and Biden is actually worthy of being indicted. If hell's bells, he should probably be in prison for treason based on what he's done.
Takes bribes from China. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that this was all just a big setup. And with the anticipation of getting some really bad headlines off of the front page, and also to create some cushion for Biden in the future, because it's not going to look good for him, especially if a future Republican administration comes along and actually follows through in the executive branch. They won't do it right now because the DOJ is utterly corrupt, and the FBI as well, helping Biden. So what say you about all that?
Well, I don't find anything in that I disagree with. I think that this is something that the Biden administration earnestly desires, has been pursuing on its own, with the Mar-a-Lago raid and the stupid business about the documents, all of which is as idiotic as the supposed charges in New York, right? I mean, there's no legal theory that has any credibility behind either thing. Like, remember the
Right.
Mar-a-Lago raid was all about documents that Trump has that are supposedly classified when he was the president of the United States, right? And they're, had plenary power to declassify documents. And the prevailing, theory on all of that is that if the president takes those documents out of the archives and brings them home or whatever, that is deemed to have been a declassification. So under no reasonable theory could there have been any real discussion of President Trump holding classified documents, in this case, at his home with the Secret Service protecting it. And then, of course, you find out about Biden, who was never president prior to 2021, had squirreled classified documents all over the place, in unsecured locations. And, okay, so what are we going to do with him? And the answer is, well, you're not going to do anything with him because we don't do anything to Democrats who break the law, right? I mean, going back certainly to the Clintons, they have just absolutely the run of the house that they can do whatever they want, and never face any legal consequences for clearly criminal behavior. So we're going to have this with Trump. And, like you said, Trump loves it, right? I mean, when this stuff first came out, Elon Musk was like, you arrest this guy and he's going to win in a landslide. And I don't know that that's wrong. It puts Alvin Bragg's name out there. This guy all of a sudden is now a hero on the left, although I don't think he stays a hero if he doesn't actually arrest Trump. I mean, he wants to run for whatever, right? Mayor of New York or governor of New York, and those voters over there are dumb enough to actually make that happen, despite the fact that this guy is one of the most substandard public officials in America. And what should be a break on all this is the goodwill and standards of the public that's being subjected to it, right? Like, you would think that red or blue, male or female, black or white, that most people would look at this and say, stop perpetrating farces on my dime, right? But apparently we don't get that. And to me, and I've got a thing about this at the Spectator today. We're recording this on Tuesday. This piece popped this morning. And my thing talks about, because all over the country you've got kind of the old standard Republican answers. Well, we're going to have a protest, right? And Trump called for this, and I'm done trying to get people on the right to protest. Okay, that it's a bad idea. It doesn't work for a couple of reasons. Number one, our people are not protesters. Our people have lives. Our people have something to lose. Okay, they have jobs, and to go make them spend a day waving signs and yelling nasty slogans and doing whatever, it's not who they are, right? And if you go back to your Alinsky, he basically, one of the rules for radicals is don't go outside of the expertise of your people, right? And on the left, they've got lots of people who sit around on a front stoop all day, and to go drag them out to a protest is no big thing because they have nothing better to do. Well, the right is full of people with lots of things better to do. And so to try to get them to go and do a protest is a waste of time. That's number one. The second thing is, and this goes back to Mahatma Gandhi, who got asked at one point about, they were doing the nonviolent means of protest in India to try to create Indian independence. And they asked him, like, look, I mean, if the colonial power was anybody other than Great Britain, would your stuff work? And he said, absolutely not. I mean, like, the one thing about the British is that they're actually fundamentally decent people. And so we are pushing them to the point where they don't want to go. Because at one point, and I think it was like 1942, somebody actually asked Adolf Hitler about what the Indians were doing. And Hitler just laughed. He said, the obvious solution is you go shoot Gandhi, right? And really, I'm not going to say the Democrats are Hitler, but it's clear they don't have much compunction about using brutal means to inflict their power on other people, right? I mean, Mark Houck was a perfect example of that. That was the abortion protester in Pennsylvania. One of these left wing, they're over there basically praying in front of an abortion clinic, and one of these left wing trolls goes and starts threatening his son, and so he pushes the guy, right? And it's the same thing as what Bragg is doing in New York City to Trump. This thing gets vetted through the legal system, and there's not going to be any charges, and there's not even a lawsuit or anything. And all of a sudden, here comes DOJ with a SWAT raid on Mark Houck because he pushed a guy that was threatening his son in front of an abortion clinic. And the whole thing is absurd, but everybody understands this. The process is the punishment, right? This guy is now famous. People don't know the whole story. They're like, Mark Houck, oh, that was that guy that attacked some guy in front of an abortion clinic. And he's like, no, I didn't do anything like that. But he's always going to be tainted by that. His Wikipedia page is always going to feature, his arrest, and the SWAT team and people are always going to look at this, not to mention all the money he's had to spend defending himself against the Justice Department and its unlimited resources and so on.
Right.
So the idea that, okay, now we're going to go and protest. And the answer is, okay, well, they're going to do to you what they did to the January 6th people. Okay. You want to go and protest this. You can do it. You can do it in the suburbs where you live, and nobody but your Facebook friends are ever going to know that you were there. Mm-hmm. Or you can go to the courthouse in the big city that you live in a suburb of and take your chances as to what the Soros DA and the left-wing freaking nut job police chief and the mayor in those cities, when they see a bunch of Trump people that they think attacked Jussie Smollett even today. These guys are coming. Well, let's get the paddy wagons and round them up because they're domestic terrorists, and we're going to charge them as that. Right. And do you really have $50,000 to pay an attorney to get off of some trumped up stupid charge? The answer is it's not worth it. Okay. And my suggestion is something else. If in fact, Alvin Bragg ultimately charges Trump, they're going to arrest him, do the whole thing, the answer is not to protest. The answer is to declare economic war on New York City. Boycott everything. Okay. No, don't travel there ever again. Do everything you can to hurt that city economically and to drain it. Get your governor to go set up an economic development office in New York City and go and try and poach every single business that's there and bring it back to Texas or to Florida or to Tennessee or South Carolina or whatever. They're already moving. Accelerate that process. And I came up with something, a friend of mine who's running for state legislature here in Louisiana, he and I came up with this last night, which is we should bring back banishment as a criminal punishment, particularly in red states, as an optional thing. There's some legal stuff out there that says banishment is a cruel and unusual punishment. But if you give them a 10-year suspended sentence, if they take a voluntary banishment, like you cannot come back to Texas ever. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And if you do and you get arrested in Texas, you're going to serve this 10-year sentence before we even talk about whatever other crime you might have done when you came back. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to have the state attorney general make a list of all of the criminal sanctuary cities that are the ones that have Soros DAs that refuse to prosecute criminals. And we're going to give our convicted criminals who take the voluntary banishment option a plane ticket to those cities. You can spend 10 years at Huntsville State Prison in Texas, or you can move to New York City. and we'll just start dumping our criminals on these places with the Soros DAs. They're asking for criminals. They're pandering to criminals.
Well, that's Houston, though. Houston
Well, that's
has
the
a
thing
Soros DA.
yeah, you're going to have to do something about the Soros DAs in these red states. And in a lot of cases, I mean, the answer is not that hard. DeSantis, I think, showed when he fired Andrew Warren, who was the Soros DA in Tampa. That's what you do, right? I mean, you may have to go change some state constitutions and so forth to clarify that the district attorney actually does work for the attorney general in that state. And if the district attorney, elected or not, can be fired for not doing his job, that takes care of the Soros DAs in red states. And really what will happen is Soros will stop spending money trying to elect DAs in blue cities in red states, because it's a waste of time, right? Like the guy comes in, he tries to start doing stuff, and then the AG just sacks him, and we're done. That'll restrain a lot of what Soros is doing to try to screw up red states. But the point is, you start giving these people what they're asking for. I mean, you saw what a massive PR win it was when they started busing illegals into sanctuary cities.
Yeah.
Well, I think do the same thing for criminals.
Yeah.
And this is not something that matters whether Trump gets arrested or not. This is something that applies everywhere there's a Soros DA who is pandering to criminals. Is okay, that's fine. You're going to get a whole bunch of crooks from New Orleans and Houston and Miami and whatever, and we're gonna we'll put them on a plane, and you will get 1,000 crooks a week descending on your city that you said you were more than happy to pander to crooks. And this is all part of having consequences for these people who are wrecking the country, and doing it with extreme prejudice. I mean, they're just actively shooting cannonballs into the edifice of law and reason in this country. And there's never any downside. Well, let's find a way to give them downside.
Well, the thing is, okay, so like your idea of the economic, war is a good one. I mean, so like Disney, for example, has had the biggest loss in its history over the last year.
Right.
And part of it was, post-COVID stuff, but a lot of it has been, I'm guessing, families like me going, you know what? Not going. Totally I have many choices. I could take my family on a road trip and go camping, or I could go to overinflated Disney park and have them be exposed to all the crazies. I think no. And so that I think has been working, but yet they haven't, Disney has not, they haven't submitted yet. Like, you know what I mean? They're still fighting.
There's still a tough nut to crack. There's no doubt about that.
And so I think the same thing for New York. Like, Capital is leaving New York. Capital is leaving California. They have to. I don't know if you saw the clip with was on some guest who was on, a guy from Shark Tank, which some VC dude who I don't know. I have never watched the show, and he was talking to Don Lemon and explaining that he would not at all ever, put a business in New York, New Jersey, Chicago.
It's like uninvestable or something.
It's uninvestable, right? And there's a whole host of new regulations that have just passed in California, for example, that are certifiably insane, like legally so convoluted that an employer doesn't even know how to stay, on the right side of the law. And so why have a business there, And so you have this, and still they're not learning. Still, they're Detroitifying themselves. the normal people are leaving, the working people are leaving. They're still increasing taxes. California wants to pass a law that if you are working for a company in California but don't live there, that you're taxed by California. I don't know how that works, but that's what they
Well, I
want.
mean, that's, you know, that gets thrown out as soon as there's a plaintiff. And I mean, you know, these things are virtue signals rather than, you know, legislation, but they won't stop doing it. And that just means they haven't suffered enough.
Right. Right. There hasn't been enough suffering. I just sit there and I don't know that we're equipped on the right. Now, as far as like sending criminals and that sort of thing, banishment, I kind of like the idea, but I don't think, you know, as far as having a stomach for it, I don't think those on, you know, people on the right really think that there's that enough of a problem to. There's so much denial about what we've been through and where we're at. I don't know that there's the stomach to do any of this, and
Well,
the
I
right's
think
divided.
I think with the criminals there is, because you talk to particularly people who live in, like, say, inner suburbs of
Mhm.
these big blue cities.
Mhm.
I mean, the crime has reached those people pretty much in force. You know, I mean, you know, car thefts and all these different kinds of things.
Mhm.
And I mean, there's nothing that irritates somebody more than having their car stolen. You know, everything else is that there's an element of danger and you're kind of like thankful to still be alive or whatever. But when they steal your car, and I know this because I've had it happen to me, um, all that that is rage, right? And there is nothing that assuages that, because almost nobody gets caught for car theft, right?
Right.
Like, they just don't. Like, they use the car for a while and they dump the car, or they bring it to a chop shop or whatever. Like,
Mhm.
you know, they never get caught. And, you know, even when they do get caught, they plead out because the prosecutors don't. I mean, they don't go after max sentences for people that steal. So in other words, if you get your car stolen, there's no criminal that you can focus your rage on. It's just the inconvenience of having the car stolen and whatever was in the car that you'll never get back, and all of this other stuff. And it's one of these things that just pisses people off to no end. Um, and yet, that happens a whole lot. I mean, like, and it's one of these big things that car thieves from the city will go to the suburbs, steal a car, bring it back to the city.
Right.
And I mean, this happens over and over again, where you get suburban sheriff's departments that actually pursue people into the city, and can't make an arrest. And the local, city police are totally freaking not up to the job. And like, this is a mess everywhere. Like, it's a mess, no matter, like, every place that there's a big blue city that's turned into a crime factory, the suburbs are all feeling it in terms of property crime by criminals from the city. So my thought is that if you did something like this at the state level and you started exporting people out of the state, that, sort of these kind of swing voters and then core Republican voters would unite behind the idea, because the number one thing is, it doesn't matter if we send them to the sanctuary cities. That's just kind of like a piece of fun. But to make it so that they can't come back, we're actually ridding ourselves of these criminals. That's something I think that works politically big time. And if it works politically big time, then your state legislators will do it, because these guys are always looking for something that actually pleases voters. I think in Congress it's less so, but at the state legislative level, I mean, you are right there with the voters. Those people are your neighbors. And so getting an attaboy from your neighbors to actually vote on something that they really like, I mean, that is literally mother's milk to a state legislator. So I think it's actually a realistic thing. Um, you can kind of debate how well you can impose something like this and carry it out. But the mere passage of it at a state legislative level. I mean, it's worth doing just to see the article in Slate that's going to show up, because they're going to call it's like, oh, this is Torquemada and the Spanish Inquisition. These things are so terrible. And it's like, we sent these people to San Francisco. Like, go and talk about how this is cruel and unusual punishment that they have to go to San Francisco.
Right.
Because maybe I don't disagree with you. Who wants to get sent to a place where there's poop all over the streets? But that's your city that you like living in. So I don't really know what to tell you. And if they say, well, you can't bring all these people to our city because, I mean, why are you doing this? It's like, what? You don't, what, like, most of them are not white, so you're a racist because you don't want to take them in, right? Oh, you don't like criminals living around you?
The answer to that is yes.
Well, yeah, I know, but they don't want to admit that, right? So, and it's like, oh, you mean having criminals descend on your city is a bad thing? Well, why'd you elect the Soros DA? He lets your criminals descend on your city. What's wrong with our criminals descending on your city? Are our criminals worse than your criminals? And if the answer to that is yes, then, I mean, please explain. So, okay, I'd like to see somebody run with this, and let's see how far we can go with it.
All right. Well, I'm dubious about this whole idea, but it is interesting. It kind of goes back to in biblical times, there was a law in Israel, basically, if you, for like crimes of passion, that sort of thing, you could say somebody, attacked one of your family members and you killed them. Mm-hmm. You could run to a sanctuary city. And if you could get there before the person who's mad at you for who wanted to send you to prison or take your life or whatever because you'd taken a life, if you could get there faster than they could catch you, you never could leave, but you weren't going to prison. You had sanctuary. And so I think, making all these liberal places truly sanctuary cities, okay, fine.
I mean, they chose it with illegals, and if de facto they're choosing it with criminals.
Well, here's the thing, though. When I step back from all of this kind of what feels a little bit like games, makes me think that, I feel like we're in a more serious position as a country than that. Like, I think we're getting to the point where there's so much degradation and the rule of law is so meaningless at this point, that everything is politicized, that if you are white male conservative in a leftist jurisdiction, you are not going to get a fair trial. In fact,
no, absolutely,
and everybody knows this. This is such a horrendous point where we know that mass killings will go away once we find out the race of the person is, they'll hope that the news anchors will actually hope that the person is white, report it as the person is white, and then it turns out to be a Chinese person, or it turns out to be a Black person. We've so gone beyond like a colorblind, equality, justice for all type of society and straight into this kind of dystopian might makes right. I mean, and so then the question is, who's stronger? And right now, the conviction and belief seems to be all on the left. Mm-hmm. On the right, we are quibbling about this stuff. You have, and maybe I just am not, I don't understand it, Scott. I've never understood it. I don't love politicians. I don't care who they are. They are a vessel for what I want politically, but they're fallen human beings. And so I have very low expectations. And so I don't understand the absolute vitriol between the DeSantis folks and the Trump folks. We don't even know that DeSantis is going to run. I don't know that it would be smart for him to run against Trump at this time. I don't even know. But
Right.
so we have this kind of garbage going on. Trump himself is in the middle of this maelstrom where he's constantly being persecuted. The law is being used. They're just bleeding him. They're just trying to bleed him of his money, his power, and his will, and make it, and more importantly, and this is where it's actually effective, make it so that no one who has any sense or any morals or any kind of decent human being wants to be seen in his presence, wants to work for him. So if he does get reelected, he's a man alone again.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have this just, it's so bad. I can't find words for it. And it feels like there's many in politics who are still viewing this as just a gamesmanship thing. And we see it in the not serious at all kind of libertarian perspective on some of the cultural issues, as if what's happening is just normal. As if 2 years ago, some of the things that are being considered now are just not insane. Like, for example, transgender surgeries for children. I mean, this is child abuse. It's insane. Men running in races and beating women all around the world. I don't know if you saw, but I just cracked up. The Iranian soccer team, half the team's men. And I was like, this perfect. Why not make the whole team men and just say they all identify as women, and then beat the shit out of every other female team around the world and really just go for it. I can't wait for the first all-male WNBA team. I can't wait.
Well, I mean, you would have thought that the feminists would have stood up to this as soon as it got started. And they blew their shot. And at this point, it's just a matter of time before all of this is the
men's B team.
Yeah, I mean, it's completely fallen apart. And then what'll end up happening is you will have the all girls leagues come next that are going to be sponsored by conservatives who were accused at the beginning of all of this of being opposed to women's sports. Right, because they were all, sexist and whatever, and women shouldn't be playing basketball and blah blah blah, and that, like, this all got hung on essentially at the time the religious right. And so you had Title IX that fixed all that, and the people that actually defend Title IX as written turn out to be the conservatives. Whereas, the left is, well, it's the men's team and the effeminate men's team. And that's fine. And it's like, well, it's not. Nobody thinks it is. You guys don't think it is. So now this is going to then turn into the conservative thing, where conservatives are going to be the protectors and defenders and advocates of women's sports. And like, everything about it is stupid. It's all stupid. And, there's this big hue and cry now because Jamie Lee Curtis wins an Oscar, and she appears, in these pictures with her son, who's clearly her son, but is wearing a dress.
Right.
And it's like, okay, so you showed up at the Oscars and you're like trying to identify as a female, and you don't even come close to passing, which just makes the whole thing hilarious. Like, it's hilarious. Right? Because there are men dressed as men that passes women better than Jamie Lee Curtis's son, who's attempting to freaking look like a female, and not well. And so, at some point you just laugh, because it's like, this is awful. And Jamie Lee Curtis probably ought to go to jail for child abuse to have done this to her kid. But I'm not even like, I'm just going to make fun of it, because I can't even get outraged about this stuff anymore because it's so freaking bad. And it's an embarrassment, and it's a freaking outrage and all the rest of it. But,
Yeah, but
Normal people.
this isn't the only thing. So like even like the war in Ukraine, it's so Putin was in Mariupol. I think that's how you say it. I don't know if I'm saying it correctly or not. And um nothing. It's like no big deal. And the Ukrainian troops and the Russian troops are just being ground up over there.
Yep.
Ukraine is running out of munitions. They've burnt it all and spent it all on through the winter. So the spring offensive, everybody knows that it's in big trouble. And you know, Biden today was trying to get 15 Abrams tanks over there as soon as possible. And it's just like, what are we doing? It's like everything is just kind of slow rolling into disaster, and no one's taking anything seriously. I feel like I'm living in an alternative universe.
Well, meanwhile, it's going to be the Chinese who broker a peace between Russia and Ukraine. And the peace that they're going to broker is going to be the one that we should have brokered, which is that Russia gets a good chunk of the Donbass and gets to keep Crimea. And the rest of Ukraine probably ends up being, like Ukraine holds on to the rest of that territory. Like that's a deal that could have been done in November or October. I mean, it was the deal that was being talked about, and we shot it down. But when China brokers that deal, which is exactly why Xi and Putin have met the last 2 days, is to try to present a united front and get that deal. And the Chinese will basically buy up Ukraine as an incentive to make this stuff work. They'll grease all the politicians from Ukraine that we've been greasing, and end up with, Ukraine as part of the Belt and Road Initiative, which will put them in hock to the Chinese at a level that dwarfs anything that we've ever done. And so like we're going to lose influence on that because we were stupid. Like, and like anybody, Stevie Wonder could see this coming. Okay. Like this is so obvious that this is what's happening. And the thing of it is we're not even doing anything while it's going on. Like this is unfolding in front of our eyes, and we're doing nothing. We are letting the Chinese come and drink our milkshake. And we're going to just sit there. And when it's over, what are we going to do? No, the war must go on. Oh, okay. Well, now the Chinese are going to sell tanks to the Russians, because that's the next step. Because believe me, Putin didn't hold this meeting with Xi unless it was all about, hey, give us some of that swag that you guys are making.
Right. I mean, the thing, and then the question becomes, is Biden doing all of this because he's been paid to do it? Well,
we know he's been paid to do it, whether that has control over Ukraine or whether he's just deferential to the Chinese whenever he thinks he can get away with it. I don't know, but like we do know the entire Biden family was bribed by China. We do know that. And I mean, we've known that for a long time. Now we have the receipts. Okay. And it's like, it's undeniable. And the fact that we have all this other stuff going on is clearly a function of someone trying to make sure that we're not talking about the bribes that the Biden family has been paid by the Chinese Communist Party. Okay. Because in a sane America that we had like not that long ago, the mere mention that, our biggest global adversary had bought off the first family well in advance of them even becoming the first family. Like we know they bought off the Bushes, like we know that. But most of, like Neil Bush and his little confab in Houston that he has, like that all came about really after George W. Bush left office, most of it. Some before, but like it really kind of kicked into gear when there was sort of some, hey, this is after the fact, so whatever. Whereas with the Bidens, I mean, this stuff was well in advance of him running for president, but at the time it was known he would. So
Here's
like
my
he's
thought,
running.
Scott. I think that what Hillary came up with, because she's not the brightest bulb, they didn't have to create a narrative. They already had it ready made with Biden. They just
Yeah,
plunked it onto Trump and
sure.
made it up and made it complete lies.
Yeah.
And to get him into this quagmire. All of this stuff has protected Biden because of all of the lies planted.
Well, and my theory on that was that Hillary Clinton didn't have much of anything to do with creating any of that, that was all Obama. Like, she worked for him. She was actually gone, but, Obama was, like, okay, Hillary was going to be the candidate in 16. So yeah, this will benefit her. But this
Right.
was all about the deep state making sure that even if Hillary lost, they were still going to maintain control of the government. And it worked like a freaking charm. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, let's not put too fine a point on it. That was a brilliant success on their part. It probably didn't have to be. Had Trump been a more veteran political actor, the mere mention of all of this stuff would have been cause for him to just completely drop the hammer on everybody, which is what he should have done. It's, oh, you had something to do with Russia. And it's like, guess what, guys? You're not swaying me. Everybody's fired. That's what should have happened. But he had no idea. He was blindsided by this. And he wasted 2.5 years of his presidency on nothing, literally nothing.
Well, I mean, the thing is, though, none of this happens without John McCain, Lindsey Graham, Mitch McConnell throwing sand in Trump's gears. I mean, all of this was purposeful. They didn't like him either. They had their payoffs and setups, and they didn't want him to interfere with what they viewed as the sweet gig. Like I said before, all of the people left and right at the top, at the elites, are just basically sucking the resources out of the world economy that they can before everything implodes.
That's right.
So I'm just kind of, I feel like some of the stuff that we're talking about are just, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a flesh wound. I feel like, that Monty Python skit, there goes a limb. Oh, it's just a flesh wound, and I don't.
Well, it's hard to talk in calm tones about the loss of the republic.
Yeah.
Which is one of the things. I mean, like we want to bring this back into some framework under which we all grew up and can understand.
Right.
But with every one of these things that comes out, it's more and more clear we are in the post-republic stage of America. And the big fight is going to be to try to bring us back to some semblance of that. And yet the people who are now in positions of advantage, are often running in another direction. And so, what are the means by which you can restore America? And, I hate to say it, but like historically, those means involve blood, which we don't want to call for.
Right.
And we have to come up with something other than that. And, okay, so there's political remedies and like
federalism. I mean, the thing is, like,
those are all good things, right?
Moving
I
to
think
places and moving to places where you feel like there is a rule of law and that there's still some freedom.
There were still some mighty fine places at the end of the Roman Empire, right? Like there were parts of the Roman Empire that were really doing well while the Visigoths were sacking Rome. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, so, you find a nice red state and red community, and I mean, you can live out your life in relative comfort and ease because things still work there. Do you care about the society in which you live? And what are you, like Sean Connery, what are you prepared to do? Right. And, I don't know that our side is at the point yet where, we're willing to, bring out the tar and the feathers and the rail. Like, I don't think that's really our people. But at some point, they're going to get pushed to such a level that they will, because ultimately this stuff can't stand. And like, my solution is, I mean, we've got the great sorting. I think let's find a way to monetize that, politically and otherwise, to our advantage. And I mean, I think federalism is certainly a way to do it, but I think the other piece is, you got to be predatory against the left, and you've got to exploit the, planned weaponization of governmental failure that they've exploited for their purposes for 40 years. Like, there's plenty of benefits in turning that against them. And I mean, I think, to me, red state legislatures is where it's at. And I mean, like, you look around, particularly in a lot of these places, I mean, there are some great stuff coming. We've talked a little bit about it. Like, Mississippi's legislature is going after the municipal powers of the city of Jackson, and really doing a good job. I mean, like, the legislators in Mississippi, it's mostly white Republicans, but they're from the suburbs of Jackson, or they're from all the little towns outside of Jackson, and elsewhere. And these guys go to lunch when the legislature's in session, and somebody steals their car. So they got sick and tired of the fact that the Jackson police can't do anything about it. So what they did was they staffed up the Jackson Capitol Police, gave it a jurisdiction that's basically like, I don't know, whatever radius around the Capitol building. I mean, their job basically was to protect the Jackson, the state capitol in Jackson, like the Capitol area, Capitol complex. Now it's like all of downtown Jackson is under the jurisdiction of the Jackson Capitol Police. And they've like built courts, and like the governor appointed judges to do the courts. And like, they have a separate justice system that if the Jackson Capitol Police catch you, you go in front of a hanging judge and they sent you off to Parchment, which is the state prison. Like, they do this whole thing. And of course, the left in Jackson, oh, it's apartheid, you can't do this kind of stuff. And like, well, guess what? When these guys go to the lunch place like a mile away from the Capitol and take a car and it gets stolen, and you pissed off those legislators, you know what? This is what you get. And don't freaking complain. This is not unelected judges. Those judges are appointed by the governor who got elected. All right. Just didn't get elected by you guys. So tough shit, And so like, in other words, they're doing this, the whole business with the Jackson water supply, where they're now going to make a regional water authority that has a bunch of suburban places in and around Jackson, and basically overwhelms, in terms of the representation, this thing overwhelms the city of Jackson. And they hate that. It's like, well, if y'all hadn't gotten $800 million worth of federal money to bail out the water system, you wouldn't be interested. And the answer to that is, you're damn right, because we're not giving you people another $800 million. You already destroyed this water system, right? We're not going to give you more money to redestroy it while you steal that $800 million. And so the whole point is that they're now taking over a lot of these municipal functions and taking them away from the left-wing urban Democrat machine. And it's a way to reclaim some of these places. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be one of the biggest things that goes on in American politics, is particularly in red states, is state legislatures and governors coming in and essentially imposing themselves on blue cities within those states that are failing.
Well, I mean, it's happening in Houston.
Yeah.
HISD just got taken over by the state.
Well, in Austin, there've been they did this thing where they're going to let the homeless basically camp out anywhere in Austin, and
right.
The state government said, "Oh no, you don't."
Right.
And so there's a big controversy there of like, who has the power to make this law, and ultimately the state has the power, because this, in every one of these states, the cities and counties, that's a subdivision of the state. It's not the same relationship as the state has with the federal government. The states are sovereign, the cities are not. And so that's where you have the opportunity to get in and actually do something, where you're going to limit the power of an urban Democrat machine to destroy a city and drive all of the middle class voters out. Like, hey, okay, fine. If that's the way you're going to play
And
it,
hopefully educate the children, and hopefully give them safe drinking water, and hopefully have, support crumbling infrastructure so people want to be there, and keep the rule of law so people feel
right.
safe. All of
And
those things, like Rudy Giuliani, when he came into New York and kind of remade it. And for those of us who remember the before and after, I mean, it's just so dramatic, it almost can't be. And now we're seeing it go the other direction.
Yeah. Now, if you didn't see the before, just go there now and you can see
Right.
what it looked like, because it's that or maybe worse.
Right. And that brings us back to the guy who is trying to potentially arrest Trump, and the kind of the rule of law falling apart. Again, I feel like all of these things all of this is a distraction from, the bigger kind of, bigger kind of falling apart nature of everything. But on the other hand, it's amazing how I was amazed how when Trump was in office, how short a time it took to turn some things around, like just getting rid of some really onerous regulations, making it so that people knew that it was safe to invest, and then people would do that. All of these very hopeful things. The more things kind of devolve, the more hopelessness people have, like me right now, and then they kind of give up. But actually, when somebody changes it the other direction, it does seem to free things up a whole lot. That kind of pent up desire for making and building is unleashed again. And
Yeah.
I'm torn, because like I felt really discouraged before Trump, and then I was like, yeah, we'll see. And then Trump came in and made some pretty basic changes, even being hamstrung those first 2.5 years, that lifted everybody up, and almost immediately lifted everybody up. And so like I sometimes wonder what the left's ultimate goal is. Is it just to enslave the world and have a few elites sitting on top of this? I can't see any other end to what they're
Well, I
doing.
mean, the goal is power, obviously. I mean, these guys are messianic utopians, and they think that if they just get control of everything, that they can, that they can make a heaven on earth. But what I keep seeing, and I, like you, I saw some validation of it with Trump, is if you just can get the boot off of everyone's neck, things will get better. I mean, like, all of the decline and everything that you see, that demoralizes you, okay, none of that is organic. On their own, people will do pretty well. I mean, I'm not going to say that things don't fall apart from time to time. They do, but there's sort of a self-regulating mechanism that, left to their own devices and without perverse incentives, you generally will have some sort of regression to the mean. And when things get bad, the pendulum will swing back. But what you have now is what you get when you allow people who are radicals and who are wreckers to control the key institutions of a culture and a society. And that's where we are. We're at the end of the long march through the institutions.
Yeah.
So like, for example, and we come back and we talk about this all the time, but it's such a good microcosm to do this. I mean, it's not that there aren't good stories for Hollywood to tell in movies. Okay. That's not, I mean, like, it's not like, oh, well, there's nothing they can do. No, Hollywood is governed by like 300 people. Okay. Those are the ones who decide what movies and TV shows get made. Right. And they all have the same agenda. Okay. If it's just a question of, hey, what's a good story that people will be willing to watch? All right. You would get a broad spectrum of perspectives having movies made. And this business of every show has got to have, one main character who's black and one main character who's gay and one main character who's trans and one who's Asian. Like, you wouldn't have any of that stuff. Because if it was just about the craft, you'd have, a whole bunch of different things, and it would mostly it would make sense, because things that make sense generally will draw an audience, and things that don't make sense don't. But over and over again, what you find is there is power behind all of the things that otherwise don't make sense. And that, if the power has an agenda, then, that's when you can start to see why things are as they are. I mean, and this applies whether it's bad TV shows or Silicon Valley Bank or, all of these different things, Ukraine, all of these different things. There's something going on behind the scenes that involves somebody making money or somebody's agenda being served. And, and we've seen this over and over and over again. And our economy is closed off, and it's oligopolistic because a very small number of people control vast amounts of each of these economic sectors. It's no longer an economy that's made up of small and mid-sized businesses where you have this vast ecosystem that can't be controlled. And that's an Obama thing. Obama, when he took office back in 2009, had a dinner, and I'm getting this from Ed Klein's book, The Amateur. He had a dinner with like these 9 left-wing historians from all these different, Ivy League schools and so forth, and the Michael Beschlosses of the world and people like that. And at this dinner, he came right out and said, I'm for a corporatist economy. I think the government can manage the economy much better when it's governed by a small number of big players. And it was like, okay, so he says this, and right after that, it starts showing up in Time and Newsweek that, he's FDR all over again. And, like they then sold this as like a good thing. And this was while the auto bailouts were going on and all the rest of this stuff. And, ultimately that's what he got. And then you get woke corporatism. So not only are you controlling the economics of a country through a small number of companies, you are now controlling the culture of a country through a small number of companies. And so it's brilliant, but the point being is that it's not organic. This is not how things have just naturally evolved. It's been pushed that way. And if you pulled that boot off of the neck, what you would find is a much more wide open thing, and a much greater consensus among the public on things that are a lot more traditional, right? Because most people are not for transgender surgeries from minors. Some state legislature passes a ban on that, and the media acts like it's controversial. Tennessee just did it. Oh, this is a super controversial thing in Tennessee. Go to Tennessee and talk to the folks. Nobody opposes it. I mean, nobody opposes it. The Democrats who voted against it did so only because they're trying to get good notices in the newspaper. They know their constituents were not for it. I mean, Black people in Tennessee are not interested in somebody turning their kids trans. They don't want that. Okay. They like that sells like mud among those folks. And so, the point is like, there are people pushing these agendas. And when you restrict their ability to do that, and folks can just kind of be, what you find is people are normal. They really are. And this America is not that different from the America of 2007, other than the capture of its institutions and the people who make messages and quote unquote form opinions, which they don't even do that well.
Well, this seems to be a worldwide phenomenon. And
It
And
is.
the boot being shoved off is happening like in the Netherlands. The Dutch farmers have like the those folks who are going to take, nationalize the farms to reduce the carbon footprint and all this stuff. They've all been thrown out of office. Jacinda, what's her face in New Zealand,
They
same
got rid of
type,
her.
got rid of her. And but in America, there seems to be this real stultifying kind of fight between the left and the right. And there's also the specter of stolen elections. So when the people can't, express themselves, they express themselves and then they're not heard, that's a problem. And when the elections themselves cannot be trusted, then we're kind of reaching, Brezhnev territory, where or Mao, where
There's definitely a Chinese Cultural Revolution piece to this. There's no question about it.
Yeah.
Vivek Ramaswamy had a really, really good quote not long ago, where he was talking about the importance of free speech in sort of turning the temperature down on all this. And, basically what he says is if you deny people the right to speak, what you're going to get is screaming. And if you deny them the right to scream, what you get is much worse.
Right.
And we're at the screaming stage right now. And I mean, some of this is it's arrogant incompetence on the part of the ruling elite in this country, and particularly on the left, that they think they can just squash people's free speech. And it doesn't really work well, right? Because what you get is memed to death. And if it's, well, we're gonna step in and we're gonna stop people from doing memes. We're going to stop comedy. And I mean, a couple of weeks ago, you were talking about Chris Rock's deal, which I ended up watching like that night.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, Chris Rock is obviously a Republican. Like he's not allowed to say
so?
he's one. Yeah, he's pretty obviously a Republican. But he's in Baltimore and he's in front of a crowd that's 99.6% Democrat. And he's like, okay, I'm going to play to the crowd a little bit. But then everything he says is a Republican thing. So it's pretty clear Chris Rock's a Republican, and good for him. It's a shame that he can't come out and say it. But I mean, the messages that he's giving out are very clearly anti-woke, PC messages.
Right.
And he's doing it in the form of comedy. Dave Chappelle, who I'm not so sure is a Republican, did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Bill Burr, who's surely a Republican, does it. And I think Bill Burr's even funnier than Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle. But I mean,
I actually think that Bill Burr is the total average man. I think what he articulates is kind of this middle of the road, what Americana, what used to be just an American point of view, kind of working class. It doesn't trust the man, doesn't really trust one side or the other.
Kind of like a Reagan Democrat, right?
Yeah, like a Reagan Democrat.
Which basically means that he's a base Republican voter now.
Well, right.
But there's like an Elon Musk and a Joe Rogan and a Bill Burr. I mean, I think that is actually what America is now. At least
I think that's what the men are. I think that the women have, and the women are ruling things right now. The single women who are not married, who don't have children, are the ones ruling things. Sonny Bunch had a really interesting piece at his Substack. I don't know if it was part of the Bulwark or whatever, but he was basically saying that in The Last of Us, in the very last episode, the girl who is immune to this virus that makes you a zombie, or fungus that makes you a zombie, there's a cure maybe, but they need to dissect her brain for it. And she's willing to sacrifice herself. But her dad, her caretaker, who's come to become attached to her, goes in and murders everybody to save his daughter, essentially. And Sonny was saying how the movie criticism should be divided into those who are parents and those who are not. And I was like, no, because the response was mixed amongst those who didn't have children. 100%. And the show creator of The Last of Us said that there was not one exception, not one, of parents who said this guy did the right thing. He said, absolutely, he did the right thing. All the parents 100% agreed. It was 50-50 amongst the non-parents. And I was like, it was to Sonny, well, the parenting kind of clarifies your morality. This is what might seem this greater good stuff is all Jim dandy and fine until you have somebody who is your flesh and blood who has to be the sacrificial lamb for the greater good. Then it's kind of like, no, I think not. And so I do think that culturally, a lot of the decisions are being made by people not particularly invested in the future, especially women.
And I think it's not as much a male female thing as it's a people with families and people without families. Like you can look at Western Europe and say, okay, they're 10 years further along than we are. Maybe a couple of years ago, practically every single country in Western Europe was run by somebody who didn't have kids.
Right.
Look at
what's happening with Macron right now in France, where
he was one, and I think Boris Johnson was in office at the same time.
Angela Merkel
was running. Merkel was one. Whoever was running, both the Netherlands and Belgium were run by presidents or prime ministers who didn't. It was like on and on and on and on and on. It was something like 9 of 11 of these countries were run by people without families.
Yeah.
And the fact that they could all get elected in these places was really what was kind of striking is that it never even came up with the electorate.
Right.
And we're not there, and I don't know that we're ever going to be there. We've got we have a different history. I mean, World War I and World War II, I think, warped the culture of particularly Western Europe, such that those are countries that don't really think much of the future, because in their recent past, it's just a matter of time before the Holocaust comes again. And by Holocaust, I mean it in a larger sense rather than what we refer to as the Holocaust. I mean, like the Maelstrom or Ragnarok or whatever else you want to say. We don't really have that in our history, right? Like we don't have a devastating event like that changes people's worldview of hey, build for the future, because generations from now our family's going to be rich and comfortable, and this legacy that we're going to be able to build. I mean, those both people still think of, well, the city's going to get burned out and we're all going to lose everything we have, and so live for today. And I think that kind of makes them culturally weaker than us. And yet we still move in the same direction as them, which is really kind of dispiriting.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is that I do think so, the single person or the single women, and I'm going to pick on all of liberals generally speaking. I mean, something like over 50%, 53% of liberal women from 18 to 29 have been diagnosed with a mental disorder.
Yeah, the rest haven't been diagnosed, which is probably worse.
Right. Well, so there's just a real problem going on culturally here amongst the liberals, and they're not willing to actually look at answers. And so, but these young people are voting, and and they're making their voices heard, and they are looking for the government to do what their and non-existent spouse, non-existent uh family network should be doing. And so
Yeah.
like I don't know.
And don't realize how empty a delivery that is going to be if they ever did get it, right?
Right. I mean, who do you like? One of the crises that we're facing right now in America that is just starting to begin is that there's simply not enough caretakers for baby boomers who are retiring. And
Yeah.
it's more expensive than the boomers expected. And so anyone who has been in one of these old folks' homes and who is single, I mean, the thought of not having children to take care of you and that sort of thing, it's really, a massive fortune so that you can pay people to take care of you in the manner you're accustomed. And even still, it's difficult. And
And it won't be there.
no, it won't be
Because
there.
the worse the ratios, the more expensive it's going to be, because you can't find people to serve as orderlies and nurses and whatever in these assisted living places. And I mean, that's when you start getting into sort of, not in so many words, but like the Soylent Green scenario,
Right.
or the Logan's Run scenario, where it's like,
Right.
okay, there's no more place for you in society because we can't take care of all of these 85-year-old people that, are no longer ambulatory and whatever. And you've put the government in such a position of power over everybody's life that they make these value judgments, because the people who work in government, that's like what they do. They
They'll download their consciousness to the internet, uh, live in the metaverse, and then be off.
Yeah, basically. I
And
mean,
their life will be an AI. We'll
yeah,
be in this internet world where that doesn't really exist. And the people who are older,
you
that's their
literally
fate.
become an NPC at the end of the day.
Yeah.
You just
We'll be literal NPCs at the end.
you populate the metaverse, and like you're Mr. Smith from the Matrix.
Hey, you know what? We need to have someone on the podcast, since we're talking about this, who is into this AI stuff and can talk intelligently about it. Because last week was like, from the tech people I know, they said that this was the most significant change in technology that humanity has experienced. And most people don't even know that it happened. And all of these various companies have released their AIs onto the world, and they're being used in innovative ways already. And so, I think that there's going to be a Matrix-like future for some people. I mean, and who knows what that's going to be like. I don't think that the world we have today is going to be the world that's even 2 years from now.
No, I think that's right.
The last 3 years have completely fundamentally changed the world in dramatic ways with the COVID stuff and that so-called technology. I think what's coming is going to be even more transformational. And I don't know that how much more transformation
No,
the we could take,
no, I
because I
mean,
don't think we have
yeah.
an ethical framework to handle it.
No, you don't. I mean, that's I mean, with everything, you need to have some ebb and flow so that you have the ability to process changes. And we're on such a turbocharged journey through all this that I don't think we can really keep up. And the big issue is so many of the people that are driving the technological changes that affect society um, are fundamentally evil people. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, I'm going to pin this whole thing on Bill Gates, but Bill Gates is a guy with a very, very warped sense of morality and ethics. And his company has gotten involved in a whole bunch of these changes. I mean, I understand that Microsoft just dumped out a couple thousand people that they had that were working on the metaverse.
All
largely
their
because,
whole ethics department they fired.
yeah, I can understand that. The two Bobs from Office Space probably showed, it's like, so exactly what is it that you do all day? Because
Well,
it
they
certainly
probably are
isn't
trying to
ethics.
fight the tide there, and are being just blown,
Well, that may be
rolled
true.
over.
That
I
may
mean,
be true.
Facebook's having the same problem because the metaverse isn't working out, and he um uh fired all of the people who were saying that, well, we don't think that this is being programmed correctly because the potential implications are terrible. Also, all of these tech billionaires are like, out with any kind of ethical framework. And so,
It's like none of them watched any science fiction movies in the 1970s and 1980s, right? Like, because every
yeah.
single one, like all of them, what we needed was Michael Crichton to still be around,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because he wrote all of these books about, oh yeah, you're going to do these great things, and look how bad it's going to go, right?
Right. Right.
And I mean, uh, well, the Lost World was the Jurassic Park book, and it
Right.
like it was about that, we're going to bring dinosaurs back to life or whatever, but that really wasn't what the book was about. What the book was about was, you better be damn careful about what you're doing with these technological advances that you're pursuing, because you are literally playing with fire or worse.
Right.
And that was a big theme of what he wrote. And I mean, from the Andromeda Strain to
Yeah.
all of these other great books that Crichton wrote. It was. I mean, every one of them was a warning about, look,
Right.
technocracy is not heaven on earth, like that. It's a dystopian thing, and you better be really careful about how much of it that you bite off. The people in charge of the advances, like, they think Jurassic Park was just this really cool movie about,
Right.
and like they missed the entire gist of it. And
I think
I
they're
see
actually
some of that.
using woolly mammoth DNA and trying to recreate it.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
like right now. So nobody's learning this lesson. I just don't think so.
Right. And I mean, okay, yeah, maybe you can bring woolly mammoths back and it's not the end of the world. But when you start bringing velociraptors back,
Hmm.
right, and T-Rex is back, which is the next thing that's going to come. Oh,
Which
won't it
I
be
think is
cool to
just a
have these?
giant chicken. Like, I mean, like a monumentally huge chicken. bring
With
bring
very
back these
sharp teeth.
with very sharp teeth and a very big head. I'm just like, what are we doing? And that's not even the least of it. Like, I've been, for people who are hearing me, I'm sounding nasal because I have had a virus for the last few days. And so in my kind of misery, I've been like reading and catching up on things that I wouldn't normally because I'm not doing anything.
Yeah.
And I watched this video about this tech that exists where you can, in one place, if you have this implant, control the body of somebody else, or implant knowledge that you have that the person on the other end doesn't have, and it works. Like, this is current tech that works. So the tech so the tech is insane, where people won't even know. And then we have the miniaturization in biotechnology and changing the actual DNA, which these mRNA vaccines are one of the ways that it's being used. Some others are using people's DNA to help them become resistant to cancers or that sort of thing. So along with these amazing kind of good things, where like I have a friend whose son had a genetic disorder. They're injecting his own corrected DNA into his brain. And now this child who couldn't walk can walk, who
Mm-hmm.
couldn't talk can talk, is learning all of these things. And they're finding that the younger they do it, the better outcomes they're having. So like there's crazy amazing things that are being done on the one hand, And then on the other hand, crazy things that are quite easily vehicles for the suicide of humankind moments
Sure.
at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and that's just it, right? Like you can, all of this stuff can be badly abused.
But there's almost no regulation, and there's no real understanding on the part. I mean, we've got legislators, Scott, who don't even know what Facebook is.
Oh, I get it. But I mean, I don't know that you, I mean, that technology is going to run out so much faster than you can regulate it. What you need, if you're going to have any hope of regulating this, not necessarily legislatively, but like societally, you need to have a virtuous public.
Yeah.
Right. Like this is the part where the things that like John Adams and Ben Franklin and some of these guys had said way back when, which is, like Adams is like, our Constitution is suited to a, religious and virtuous population and wholly unsuited to any other. The kind of freedom that, that attaches to having these technological advances in a private sector setting, you better have really virtuous people and ethical people in that private sector, because otherwise what you end up with is James Bond villains.
I think we have James Bond villains.
We absolutely have James Bond villains. And so you start, okay, well, how do you deal with this? And it comes back to this, this stuff that we were talking about before, which is, how you deal with it probably is going to be really unpleasant. And that's like one of the reasons why I keep saying, like, we have got to find ways to make consequences for, negative consequences for people who abuse our system and our civil society and so forth, in ways other than, the mob shows up and burns you out of your house. We've got to be able to make it so
I don't know. I mean, I think that we're headed towards a Butlerian jihad.
We probably are.
But for those who don't know what that is in the book Dune, which I recommend going seeing the Denis Villeneuve movie. But anyway,
sure,
his version of it, the first section anyway. But the book, the premise of part of it, which at the end doesn't actually happen, but anyway, the Butlerian jihad was that humankind was so overcome and hated computers and anything digital so much that they destroyed all, technology. So, but not all, we saw some, sneak through, and of course, the biotechnology did, and the cloning and stuff never got ended.
Right. Well, and I don't know that we'd ever do that, but I do think that society at some point is going to have to come to terms with the importance of human values in governing technology, and we're nowhere near there. And in fact, we've given an enormous amount of power to people who have looked upon technology as its own source of morality.
Yeah.
And we're rapidly finding out that is the wrong way to go.
Nobody's even following Asimov's rules for robots. Like is AI even, is the premise in AI, and somebody was asking this on Twitter, is there a premise that whatever is the highest good for humans, like, because the first law of robotics was that to protect human life.
Right.
Well, this AI stuff, what it's, coming out with doesn't seem to be very pro-human.
No, it seeks to replace humans.
Right. I mean, every time you ask this amalgamation of, and all this AI stuff is a series of prompts at the behest of whoever is programming it and how it's
Yeah.
filtering information and spitting it out. There's no such thing really as artificial intelligence. It's human intelligence crapped out of your computer in a way that some coder has prompted it to do so and filtered the information and made it linguistically sound like a conversational way of conveying information, but it's not.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like everybody is so geeked up about Chat GPT and this, you know, oh, it can write an article and blah blah blah. And I've yet to read anything that Chat GPT wrote that I find readable. Like it's all to me. It's just gobbledygook, you know.
Well, a lot of it is, and one of our a woman who runs her social media for the American Spectator, her husband's into this kind of thing, and she said that when he just gave it a prompt to write this philosophical article, and it had attributed quotes to I can't remember the philosophers, but just let's say Sophocles or something, and the quote wasn't true. It was just a made up thing,
right? And
so, like, the problem that is inherent in all of this is that it'll just be spitting lies that people perceive as truth.
Yeah,
and because
it's garbage in, garbage out. I mean,
that's right. Well, because the form feels relatable,
right?
I don't know. Anyway, well, that's a topic for another day. I think we've done a fairly good job of sketching out the current problems.
A little bit.
But
I mean, it's an interesting podcast that starts with Alvin Bragg and goes to artificial intelligence, right? So it's like real unintelligence to artificial intelligence
of dubious quality,
right? Like, yeah. So that's the progression for this last hour and 20 minutes, I guess.
Yeah, the thing is like what I keep coming back to. The solution in both things is just I watched the extended version of Lord of the Rings, which is on HBO right now for everybody. The whole thing, and it was I guess they've digitally redone it, and so it looked beautiful the way it was streaming and everything, but the extended version. And I think that the answer is always going to be the hobbits. The answer is always going to be the little people doing the right thing and finally getting fed up with the elites being feckless or being overcome, in the case of one king who was just kind of like possessed by wrong ideology, and another king who'd given up to, or steward who'd given up to despair. There's so many ways you can go wrong in leadership.
Yep.
It's the common people who have to take back the world for themselves, and which is kind of a populisty message, which tends to be scary because a ton of blood tends to be shed when that happens. But like you said, when people are not heard, when talking doesn't do it, and then screaming doesn't do it, that leads to places like what happened in Lord of the Rings, where someone has to take on the orcs.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of orcs right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's one reason why it's a little discouraging to see the right failing to come together when so many people can see what the problems are.
Right.
And yet, like every day we're going to see Trump throwing bombs at DeSantis.
Right.
And then, DeSantis throws something back at Trump, which I didn't really think was that bad, but
right.
The Trump people are acting like it was a grave atrocity that was committed. Right. And it's like, okay, we need both of these two guys.
Right.
Right. Like we're going to need an entire movement. This is a 16-year, 20-year project to rebuild the country. And it's not going to get done if you guys are busy having little pissing contests every day. That's not what this is.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about either one of you. It's about the country.
Right.
And if our side's not willing to, to think about things in those terms, first and foremost, and not about the selfish, petty, personal political ambitions of, some guy really wants to be president. Look, none of that shit matters. Like, it doesn't matter. I mean, if the left is gonna run a justice department that can go get anybody for any reason
Right.
because they don't like their politics, um, I mean, we no longer are in a country that's worth even having, and it's probably better if we split this thing up,
Yeah.
rather than be governed by people like that. Hopefully, I mean, I don't want it to come to that. I want to revive America, and I think it's still doable because I don't give the left that much credit. But if we're not even going to show up for the fight, we can't win it.
Right. Well, if we're fighting each other, we can't win it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, to me, it's, guys, could we please just show up?
Right.
I mean, could we at least try to get our act together here and see where that goes? Because, the country's not dead. The problem is our side is not representing. Our side is not doing what it needs to be done. And for the longest time, we let the Bush Republican crowd, the John McCains and the Mitt Romneys, who didn't have the survival of the republic as their top priority, and they basically tried to ignore that there was even any threat to it. And so we wasted 30 years with those idiots. And then, you had to have somebody like Trump, like, well, he's not perfect. And it's like, well, no kidding. I mean, a perfect guy is not going to run for office now. So,
No.
let's take what we get, the good with the bad. The left doesn't have anybody perfect. I mean, they're still idolizing Obama, and you can't get any more petty and picayune than that guy. Was a terrible human being that survived on media attention and nothing else, and ruined the country. And they still think he was a superstar. And it's like, okay, well, I don't
Well,
require that
he
kind of
did it all
heroism.
under the, I mean, he was a superstar. He is a superstar. He managed to be a mediocrity and to come across and effectively, fundamentally change America. He was effective. Sure. And he's lazy, is low character, and not that great of a guy. And he managed all of that with the help of a media who utterly enthralled by they like the nastiness. The problem that a lot of these folks have with Trump is that he uses the methods of the left and it pisses them off.
Absolutely.
So it's not that and a lot of people on the right are like so highbrow that kind of get into the mud type of politics offends their sensibilities.
Right.
Well, I mean, they can get off their high horses anytime now.
I think most people on the right have kind of come around to a recognition that, okay, this is just sort of where politics is, and we've got to do it. They may not like it, but they can accept it. I think the ones that aren't sold on Trump kind of look around and are like, yeah, but like, you want to do that style, but you're not as good at it as the left is.
Right.
Which I think is a valid, a valid question. I mean, like you go back and you look, well, why did Fauci and Birx still have a job? I think those are questions really for me that are much more interesting, where Trump as a candidate in 2024 Arkansas is like, look, I don't mind you slashing throats. I just want you to make sure that you slash them all the way through.
Right. Right.
And please don't practice on Ron DeSantis, who we need for 2028, if nothing else.
Right. Right.
Right. So anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, thank you all for listening. Please like and subscribe, share, if comment everything. You can email us both. We talked about that before. And so we really appreciate you listening today. And we'll see what happens. I don't know. While this whole podcast was going on, they could have arrested Trump. I don't know. But somehow I doubt it.
Yep.
And we'll see what happens tomorrow if it doesn't happen today. It was an effective ruse if it doesn't happen. It certainly achieved what they wanted it to. And like Scott says, everybody's got to come together. This is not going to work. And there's a lot of bloodletting right now on our own side when there's bigger fish to fry, obviously. So hopefully that will get resolved and this kind of nonsense will stop. And but I doubt it. We'll have more to talk about next week because, or the week following, because I'm taking vacation next week. I didn't tell you that. So you'll
I'm gonna carry the show.
You'll carry the show. Scott will carry the show. And I will be out in West Texas, unplugged from this world. That's what I'll be doing. So anyways, thanks all for listening. Catch us next time. Subscribe and like and share. We appreciate it.